2, 1.
Good kill.
Why does the United States have over 8,000 soldiers stationed in peacetime Kuwait? More broadly, why does a country so seemingly determined to avoid another land war need a large standing army with troops all over the globe?
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
The United States currently accounts for 75% of NATO defense expenditure. So there is no sign of peace for the future. But who will manage this nation and continue its military dominance? US politicians are building up for the 2016 presidential elections, where one man or woman will exert power over millions of lives of its citizens and will also affect political decisions around the world. Jeb Bush is a Protestant convert to Catholicism, and he is a member of the Knights of Columbus, like the previous president, John F. Kennedy. He has already shown his allegiance to the papacy in a visit to the previous pope, Benedict XVI, but he was also born into a wealthy, privileged family with very high connections. His paternal grandfather, Wall Street banker Prescott Sheldon Bush, whose father-in-law, George Herbert Walker, also an American banker and businessman, both laid the foundation of the military-industrial complex. But the reality is, it does not matter who wins. Whichever candidate inherits 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue for the next 4 or 8 years, no matter what their intentions, they will be groomed and sucked into the vortex of the world order. But what will be its ultimate goal of its military, industrial complex? Vatican City, the headquarters of the papacy, is patiently waiting for that moment to be restored to her former medieval glory. For as the Vatican notoriously thinks in centuries, as the British press confirms, the United States of America is the only superpower who has the military arsenal that can accomplish the papacy's goals. When she ruled and dominated Western Europe, she spread fear, war, and spilt innocent blood. Any king who opposed her authority was humiliated into submission, like King John of England, who had his crown kicked by the papal legate of Pope Innocent III, and was threatened with an invasion of a French army if he did not submit to the Pope's authority, or the 11th century German monarch, King Henry IV, who had to stand 3 days and 3 nights in a snowy blizzard before the Pope would see him to revoke his excommunication. You could not become a king without submitting to the authority of the Pope, and though this rule was sometimes contentious, the French general Louis Alexandre Berthier ended this supremacy and humiliated the Pope after his 1,260-year absolute rule, stripping him and the papacy of its power. But 2 centuries later, an Italian socialist called Benito Mussolini gave the papacy the economic and political boost she needed, when after a secret meeting with Cardinal Pietro Gasparri, the papal Secretary of State under Pope Pius XI, the famous Lateran Treaty was signed on February 11, 1929, that bears the signatures of these 2 men, and it catapulted the papacy back onto the world stage as a respected religio-political power. In a book titled The Vatican Assignment, published in 1956, Sir Alec Randall, the Secretary of the British Legation to the Papacy, or Holy See, in the 1920s, documents the rise of her diplomatic influence beginning with the year of the First World War. In 1914, there had been 16 diplomatic representatives to the Vatican. In 1925, there were 26 ambassadors and ministers accredited to the Pope. In 1955, there were 30 embassies and 20 legations in the list, including such non-Christian countries as India, Indonesia and Japan, though several were vacant, above all in respect of communist countries. In more recent times, according to the Catholic press, the Vatican is second only to the United States in the number of countries with which it enjoys diplomatic relations, 188 and 177 respectively. And there are Catholic priests, nuns and lay people in every country on the planet. As a result, the Holy See is well informed about developments all over the globe. It was Eugenio Pacelli, who later became Pope Pius XII, who boosted its diplomatic relations. And now Pope Francis I has the most influential diplomatic corps on earth. It's amazing that people can't see that she is a powerful political power on the world stage. When the Pope visits Asia, and when he passed through South Korea and the Philippines, it was to strengthen diplomatic relations with the Papacy and these two countries. For the Papacy, known in diplomatic protocol as the Holy See, is the only state in the EU that has diplomatic relations with the Republic of China, better known as the sovereign state of Taiwan. And like the United States, has strong ties with Japan, where Tsuraki Nagasaki, the Japanese ambassador to the Holy See, gives his credentials to Pope Francis I. Let us carefully analyze her influence. In the territory of the First Kingdom, Europe, the papacy is still revered in a very secular region. While visiting the EU Parliament in Strasbourg, Pope Francis I was not challenged in any way, shape or form about his speech by any politician or corporate media, but he was praised by individuals who feed off British immigration. Chancellor of Germany, Lutheran Angela Merkel, visits Pope Francis I to bolster the Catholic votes in her homeland. François Hollande, the President of France, strengthens political ties. And though the monarchies of Europe no longer fight on her behalf, the prestige is still there, even amongst her once hostile rival, Britain. Antonio Menini is the papal ambassador to the UK, where he gives his credentials to the British monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. Nigel Baker, the UK ambassador to the Holy See, speaks on being one of the first countries to establish diplomatic relations in 1914, where he also gives his credentials to Pope Francis I. What about Islam? She is viewed as a menace to the world, according to the press. But Avra Manhattan, whose level of scholarly journalism is hard to come by today, it's clear that the papacy had her under her radar after the Second World War. In 1947, the Muslim East made its first official approach to the Vatican. Egypt exchanged representatives to the Pope and sent to Rome a minister plenipotentiary. Other Muslim countries, example Syria, the Lebanon, Iran, followed Egypt's example, and soon even those Muslim lands which had not yet officially exchanged diplomats were unofficially in close touch with Rome. Habib al-Sadr is a Shiite Muslim and has been Iraq's ambassador to the Holy See since 2010. In exchange, Monsignor Giorgio Lingua is the papal nuncio or ambassador to Iraqi Kurdistan, where the papacy's influence is covertly felt in diplomatic circles. Iran was one of the first Islamic states to establish diplomatic links. Iran also has its ambassador to the papacy, and the papacy also has its ambassador to Iran. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi strengthens diplomacy between Egypt and the Holy See, as Egypt was the first Islamic state after the Second World War to do so. When the Pope visited Turkey, it was not just to strengthen ties with the Eastern Orthodox Church, but to win the hearts of that predominantly Muslim population, where he is received well by one of its top imams as well as its leader. The King of Jordan, Abdullah II, not only received the Pope in his homeland, and asks him to help solve the wars in the Middle East. But he is also received in the Vatican, where he absolutely just praises the Pope. Saudi Arabian politician Faisal bin Abdul Rahman bin Mumar is the Secretary General of the King Abdullah Center for Interreligious and Intercultural Dialogue. He strengthens interreligious dialogue with the Saudi government and the papacy. And Yahya Palavadici, the Imam of the Al-Walid Mosque in Milan, Italy, and President of the Islamic Religious Community of Italy and Counselor for the relations with the Vatican and Italy, also strengthens close ties with the Holy See, better known as the Papacy. So no matter what threats come from ISIS, the majority of the Islamic world has the Pope's back.
I count on the Catholic Church, under your leadership, under your spiritual guidance, to continue to work closely with the United Nations to promote a life of dignity for all. Your Holiness, it is my great honor once again to invite you to grace us with your presence at the United Nations headquarters in New York at your edition of papal visits, and be an opportunity for you to speak of your vision for our common future.
Earthring Cousin is the 14th Executive Director of the United Nations World Food Programme, who was ranked as number 45 on the Forbes magazine list of the world's 100 most influential people, also strengthens ties with the papacy. Jose Graziano da Silva is the Director General of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, greets Pope Francis I at his inauguration ceremony. Guy Ryder is the 10th General of the United Nations International Labour Organization, also strengthens stronger ties with the papacy with his meeting with Pope Francis I. Irina Boskova, Director General of the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, better known as UNESCO, is another governing body of the UN that strengthens ties. The military might of the United States and the political religious influence of the papacy brought the two kingdoms together to join forces to bring down communism. And for those who think this will never happen again, that's what you think.
The Vatican, in a rare move, says that it will support the use of airstrikes against ISIS militants, and that breaks a long-standing position of disapproving war. They released this statement: military action might be necessary, and, quote, intervention now, before it is too late.
Archbishop Silvano Maria Tomasi, who made this statement, is the permanent observer to the UN in Geneva, and the Vatican is endorsing war. But she cleverly says it is to protect the persecution of Christians in Iraq. But Christians are being persecuted, tortured, murdered and excommunicated from their communities all over the world, including Catholic Mexico. Did the Pope reprimand the Mexican president on the persecution of Catholics who proselytize to Bible-based Christianity? Not at all. And as the papacy set up the oldest diplomatic school in the United States in Georgetown University, her policy in that country will never be challenged. For the papacy has her representative in the United States government, where Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano represents the Holy See to President Barack Hussein Obama. But what does this mean for the future, when the two kingdoms' Secretary of States meet to discuss peace, when they are both endorsing war?
Honorable John Kerry, Secretary of State.
Holiness, I am so pleased to meet you. Great admirer of everything you have been doing as a Catholic for the Church and for everyone. Thank you so much.
Though the papacy will depend upon the United States military, where is all this information leading to? There is a point to identifying the two kingdoms. For this is not just information looking at current affairs, this is prophecy.